Have you ever wondered what life was like for the super rich during the Middle Ages? Not just kings and queens, but the lords, noble families, and wealthy merchants who lived in luxury, while most people worked hard just to survive. Tonight, we're going to step inside the world of the medieval rich, into their castles and manors, where they ate fancy meals on golden plates, bathed in water scented with flowers, and wore soft clothes made from silk brought from faraway lands. You'll fall asleep hearing the sounds of clinking cups, soft velvet robes, and quiet church music echoing through stone halls lit by candlelight. This isn't the history class version of the Middle Ages. This is the hidden world of the rich and powerful, the 1% who lived lives most could only dream of. Let's begin. Chapter 1: A World of Wealth. Who were the medieval elite? Being rich in the medieval world was not like being rich today. It was louder, heavier, and much more dangerous. The rich had land. That was the main thing. Land meant power. Land meant food. Land meant people working for you every single day. Every tree, every stone, every pig in the field. Yours. At the top sat the king. He owned everything. Technically, but he could not manage it all, so he gave parts of it away to trusted men, lords, dukes, counts, barons. He gave land in exchange for loyalty and armies. If the king needed 500 knights, the lords had to send them. No excuses. These lords ruled their lands like little kings. They had their own castles, their own knights, their own servants, and they answered to no one except the king himself. Their castles were not like the fairy tale kind, not at first. Early ones were made of wood, big towers on hills, surrounded by walls and ditches. Later, they built with stone, thick grey blocks, huge iron gates, secret passages, trapdoors, moats. Some even had dungeons. Not all of them were for show. Inside, life was warm and busy. Servants ran up and down stone staircases. Fireplaces roared. Candles flickered on every wall. The lord sat in a big chair, covered in furs, sipping wine out of a goblet. Dogs sleeping at his feet. A falcon on a perch. Tapestries hanging all around. Food was everywhere. Big feasts with roasted birds. Pigs stuffed with apples. Trays of cheese and nuts. Bread still warm from the oven. Wine poured into silver cups. Jesters told jokes. Musicians played soft songs on harps and flutes. A rich medieval lord did not dress simply. He wore layers. First a soft linen shirt, then a wool tunic, then a fur-lined cloak, all dyed in bright colours: blue, green, deep red. Colours meant money. Dye was expensive, especially purple. He wore rings, a gold belt, sometimes even a small dagger for show. His boots were leather, cleaned daily. His hair combed by someone else, nails trimmed by someone else, sometimes even teeth brushed by someone else. His wife wore even more, long gowns with silk trim, embroidered sleeves, necklaces, pearls, veils that covered her head and flowed behind her, shoes with pointed toes, rings on every finger. She might wear makeup, powder made from lead, Not healthy, but fashionable. These people were the elite, but they were not the only ones. In the cities, something new was happening. Wealth without land. Merchants. They did not inherit land. They did not marry into royal blood. They built wealth by trading, buying wool in one town, selling it in another, shipping salt across the sea, spices from the east, silks from faraway lands. They lived in large stone houses, with wooden beams and tall windows. They had servants too, cooks, maids, guards. They held dinner parties, bought expensive clothes, painted their walls with flowers and saints. Some of them became richer than knights, richer than minor lords. They loaned money to kings, paid for bridges, paid for cathedrals, paid for wars. Their sons married daughters of noble families, and just like that, a merchant family could become noble. One generation of trade, one smart marriage, and you were sitting at the same table as people whose bloodlines stretched back to Charlemagne. But even merchants were not the whole story. There were the bishops and abbots, leaders of the church. The church was rich, maybe the richest of all. People gave money to the church to save their souls, to pray for their dead, to avoid hell. The church owned land, more than any noble family. They collected rent, tithes, fines, gifts. They built cathedrals that reached the sky. Bishops lived like princes. Long robes, gold rings, fine wine, feast days, soft beds. They traveled with guards, with horses. They judged legal cases, wrote letters to kings, decided who could marry who could inherit land, who went to war. They did not swing swords, but they had power, real power. So, kings at the top, nobles beneath them, then knights, merchants, bishops, and abbots. This was the world of the elite. All around them were peasants, serfs, servants, the ones who worked the fields, baked the bread, cleaned the floors, fought the wars. A peasant might go their whole life without touching a gold coin. A noble might have trunks filled with them. A servant might eat bread and onion soup every day. A rich man might never eat the same thing twice in a week. Poor people walked everywhere. Rich people had horses or litters, carried by others. Poor people had one set of clothes. Rich people had dozens. For every season, every feast, every ceremony, the gap was massive, and the rich wanted it that way. They built big houses to show their power, tall towers, thick walls, painted ceilings, carved doors, windows with colored glass. They paid for portraits. They hired poets to write about their bravery. Their family tree was written in gold ink. Their ancestors were buried in stone tombs, covered in sculptures. They hosted tournaments, knights in armor, horses charging, crowds cheering, gold given to the winners, feasts to follow. They threw festivals, hired fire breathers, dancers, jugglers, built stages, told stories, burned torches all night. It was not just about wealth, it was about showing it, proving it, living it, every single day. Some elites never touched work. Others were deeply involved. A merchant might count coins every morning. A bishop might oversee new construction. A lady might manage servants and supplies. A lord might train with weapons, inspect horses, hold court. But they did not toil. They commanded. Some had libraries, shelves of handwritten books, worth a fortune. They read about philosophy, law, theology, medicine, stars and planets. They studied Latin, French, Greek. Education was a sign of status. Knowing how to write made you powerful. You could record deals, sign laws, write wills. And if you could write in Latin, you were almost untouchable. Not all elites were good people. Some were kind. Some were cruel. Some helped the poor. Others taxed them to the bone. Some built schools. Others built prisons. Power came with choices, and they had plenty. But they were not all safe. Wealth attracted envy. Castles were attacked. Lords were betrayed. Merchants were robbed. Bishops were poisoned. You had to protect what you had. Hire guards, build walls, make alliances, marry smart. Being rich was a game, and the stakes were high. Still, if you played it well, if you were born into the right family, or smart enough to rise, or lucky enough to survive, you could live a life most could not even imagine. This was the world of the medieval elite. Chapter 2: Castles, Manors, and Palaces. Homes of the powerful. The rich did not live in huts. They did not sleep near the animals. Their homes were made of stone, tall, thick, cold, but solid, built to last for centuries. The castle was not just a home. It was a fortress, a symbol, a weapon. It said one thing to the world: I have power, and I am not afraid to show it. A good castle sat on a hill. It had a view of everything: roads, rivers, forests, villages. You could see who was coming. You could stop them if you had to. The walls were high, 10 feet, 20 feet, sometimes more, made of stone, smooth on the inside, rough on the outside, hard to climb, harder to break. At the center was the keep, the main tower, the heart of the castle, thickest walls, smallest windows. If enemies got past the outer walls, the keep was the last stand. To get inside, you crossed a moat, a wide trench, sometimes filled with water, sometimes just a deep pit with spikes at the bottom. One way in, a wooden drawbridge. It could be raised in seconds. Past the drawbridge was the gatehouse. Heavy doors, iron bars, guards above, holes in the ceiling for boiling oil or arrows. No one entered unnoticed. Inside the walls was the courtyard, open space, horses, training fields, storage sheds, a well, sometimes a garden, and always people. Pages ran across the yard, blacksmiths hammered iron, cooks carried baskets, dogs barked, chickens ran wild, soldiers trained with wooden swords. It was a city inside a shell. The Lord's family lived in the great hall, a wide room with high ceilings, thick beams, a massive fireplace at one end, tables lined with trenchers and goblets, candles burned day and night. At the centre sat the Lord, on a raised platform, in a carved chair. He wore furs, spoke rarely. Every word mattered. Servants brought food, hot meat, fresh bread, butter, honey, fruits when they were in season, almond milk, ale, wine, not just for guests, for everyone in the hall. But the Lord always got the best. Want me to keep going with the rest of chapter 2? You said, way longer. ChatGPT said, perfect. I'll now write the full chapter 2 at approximately 2,000 words in your approved tone and pacing, rich with detail, short sentences, no filler, and focused on vivid imagery. Chapter 2: Castles, Manors, and Palaces. Homes of the powerful. The homes of the rich were not just shelters. They were messages, each wall, each window, each gate. Every part of the building told the world one thing: I am above you. If you were rich in the Middle Ages, you did not live small. You lived wide. You lived tall. You built with stone, not wood. Your roof was not straw. It was slate, or tile, or lead. There were different kinds of homes for the elite: castles, manors, palaces, monasteries, townhouses. Each one was a world of its own. Let's start with the castle. The castle. The castle was a fortress, a weapon, a house made for battle. Rich lords built castles to defend their land, to protect their people, but also to show off. A castle said one thing clearly: I am rich. I am strong. Stay out. They were usually built on hills. High ground gave an advantage. You could see enemies from far away. You could see the roads, the forests, the fields. You could see your power. Castles were massive, thick stone walls, guard towers at each corner, flags flying high, gates made of oak, reinforced with iron. Some had moats. A wide trench around the whole thing, filled with water, or dry, but deep. You could not cross it without a bridge. The bridge could be pulled up, fast, if needed. If you were lucky enough to get inside, you would enter the gatehouse. This was the checkpoint. Guards watched from above. There were murder holes, arrow slits, traps. Then came the courtyard. Open air, dirt and stone ground. Sometimes gardens, sometimes animals, always people, always noise. Blacksmiths worked near the walls. Servants carried water. Children ran between buildings. Men trained with swords. Women moved between kitchens, weaving rooms, and storage areas. It was never quiet. The heart of the castle was the keep, a tower in the center, the last defense, the strongest walls, the smallest windows, the most food stored. The lord and lady slept here. So did their children, their most trusted advisors. Guards were stationed at the stairs, day and night. The great hall was where they ate, where they held court, where they entertained guests, long wooden tables, thick carpets, fireplaces taller than a man, walls covered with tapestries, bears and deer heads mounted above. Meals were loud, dozens of people at once. Food kept coming, bread, roasted meats, stews, cheese, berries, wine and ale, spices from far-off lands, cinnamon, pepper, saffron, a sign of wealth. At the high table sat the Lord, the lady beside him. Their chairs were larger, higher, symbolic. Behind them hung the family crest, usually with lions, eagles, swords, something powerful. Castles also had chapels. Every rich family had a private one. A priest said daily prayers. Servants attended. Children learned scripture. Bedrooms were upstairs. No bathrooms, just chamber pots, emptied by servants. Beds were raised, made of wood, stuffed with straw or feathers, covered in thick blankets, sometimes fur. There was also a solar, a private sitting room where the Lord's family could relax, play music, read, speak without the noise of the hall. Below the ground were cellars, storage rooms, wine, salted meat, dried fruit, cheese, barrels and barrels of ale. These rooms were cold, dark, but important. Some castles had dungeons, dark stone holes, iron bars, chains, for traitors, for enemies, for people who owed the Lord something they could not pay. Owning a castle meant more than just living in one. It meant power. You were a force. You ruled land. You controlled people. You were untouchable, or close to it. But not every rich person lived in a castle. The manor houses were different. They were not made for war. They were made for comfort. Lords who did not expect battle often chose manors. They were still large, still impressive, but more open, more beautiful, less stone, more wood, more windows. A manor was the center of an estate. Around it were fields, farms, villages, all worked by peasants. The Lord collected rent, collected crops, controlled justice. The manor itself had gardens, rose bushes, fountains, fruit trees, beehives, swans in ponds. The house had a great hall too, smaller than a castle's, but still grand, with carvings on the ceiling and paintings of saints. There were guest rooms, storage rooms, kitchens, a buttery, a pantry, a solar, a chapel. Servants lived on the property, in small rooms, in the attic, in buildings behind the main house. The manor had less defense, but more peace. Inside, life was detailed. The Lord might rise at sunrise. A servant brought warm water, helped him dress. Another lit the fire. Others opened the shutters. Breakfast was light. Bread, cheese, maybe eggs, maybe cold meat. Then came business, talking with stewards, managing lands, hearing disputes. Lunch was heavier. A main meal, meat, stew, ale, pies, sweets made with honey or sugar. Afternoons were for hunting, or riding, or reading, or prayer. Dinner was smaller, quiet, maybe just family, maybe with guests. Candles burned as servants poured wine. Music played from the corner. Night came. The house dimmed. Fires were stoked. Curtains drawn. People went to bed. And, in the distance, peasants still worked. Their fires still burned, but not in stone homes, in huts, far below. The townhouse wealthy merchants lived differently. They did not own castles, not often. They lived in towns, in big stone homes, tall, narrow, built close together. The first floor was the shop, or the business, or the storage room. Above that, the living space, bedrooms, a kitchen, a dining area. These homes had glass windows, rare, expensive, a sign of money. Some had running water from pipes or wells nearby. They had soft beds, painted walls, carved furniture, imported carpets. Their meals were rich. Their guests were important. Other merchants, bankers, priests, sometimes even nobles. Their wealth came from trade, from risk, from knowledge. They traveled. They spoke multiple languages. They read letters from other countries. Their children went to school, learned numbers, writing, Latin, law. At home they had the same things as nobles, just less space, but just as much gold. The palace kings and queens lived in palaces, when they were not at war, when they were not on the road. Palaces were huge, larger than most castles, more decorative, covered in marble, gold, silver, statues, murals. Inside were hundreds of rooms, libraries, ballrooms, dining halls, bathing rooms, kitchens that could feed an army, gardens stretched for miles, fountains shot into the air, peacocks wandered freely, musicians played for hours. The king's bed was massive, covered in silk, surrounded by curtains. His slippers were velvet, his robes embroidered with real gold thread. He woke to a dozen people, bringing clothes, news, water, schedules. His day was planned to the minute. Every part of a palace was made to impress, to show that the king was chosen by God, above all men. But it was also fragile. A king could fall, be betrayed, be replaced. His palace could become a prison or a ruin. Homes of power, whether it was a castle, a manor, a palace, a townhouse, all elite homes had one thing in common. They separated the rich from the poor. They were high, thick, beautiful, safe. They were full of warmth and light, food and laughter, gold and silk. Outside those walls were cold fields, empty bellies, dirt floors, cracked hands. Inside was the good life. For the elite, their home was not just a place to live. It was proof of who they were, of what they had, of how far above others they stood. And if you ever stepped inside one of these homes, you would never forget it. Chapter 3. Feasting like a king. Food, drink, and banquets. Rich people in the Middle Ages ate better than you can imagine. They ate to show off. They ate to impress. And they ate like it was a performance. Food was not just food, it was art, power, theatre. Feasts were events, not just meals. They lasted for hours, sometimes days. If a noble hosted a feast, everyone knew. Invitations went out early. Guests travelled miles to attend. Some rode on horseback, others in carts, some with whole entourages. The great hall was transformed. Clean straw was laid on the floor. Walls were covered with tapestries. Candles lit every corner. Musicians played softly as people arrived. The guests entered, nobles, knights, clergy, wealthy merchants. The room filled with silk, velvet, fur, gold jewelry, perfumed hair. Everyone was dressed to be seen. The long tables were set, wooden boards on trestles, covered in fine cloth, silver goblets, pewter plates, carved knives, spoons with bone handles. At the high table sat the lord and lady, always raised above the others, seated on large chairs, cushioned and carved, a symbol of their rank, of their distance from everyone else. The food began to arrive, one course at a time. It never stopped. First came the bread, always warm, always fresh, some plain, some with herbs or spices. Bread was the heart of every meal, even for the rich. Then came pottage, a thick stew made with grains, meat, onions, peas, boiled for hours, poured into bowls, served with butter and salt. Next came fish, lots of it, roasted trout, fried eel, salted herring, pike with pepper sauce, salmon soaked in vinegar and herbs. On fasting days, fish replaced meat. But the elite still made it luxurious. Then came the roasted meats, pork, venison, goose, lamb, chickens stuffed with herbs and fruits, peacocks with feathers reattached after cooking, swans cooked whole and placed on golden trays. Sometimes even a boar's head was served, mouth open, apple inside, eyes made of berries. Horns wrapped in silver leaf, not for taste, for spectacle. Alongside the meat came sauces, spicy, sweet, sour, made with cinnamon, cloves, saffron, vinegar, wine, almond milk, honey, mustard. The more exotic, the better. Each dish was announced as it arrived, sometimes by a servant, sometimes by a musician. Each one was placed carefully, never rushed. Then came pies, thick crusts, filled with meat, eggs, dates, raisins, boiled eggs wrapped in pastry, sweet pies with apples, pears, cheese and sugar. At some feasts, a whole pie would open to release live birds, doves flying from the crust, Everyone would gasp. It had nothing to do with hunger. It had everything to do with power. Between the courses came entertainment, jugglers, dancers, singers, poets, a bear on a chain, a fire breather, a trained monkey, anything to keep the guests amused. More food followed: custards, fritters, tarts, creams, candied fruit, cheese in all colours and shapes, nuts roasted with honey. Wine flowed freely: red, white, sweet, spiced. Ale was served too, and mead, and cider. Cups were never empty. If you finished a drink, a servant refilled it without asking. For the lord and lady, special drinks were made: rosewater, herb wine, spiced milk, served warm, in cups with jewels. Some feasts lasted until dawn. When it ended, guests stumbled out full, drunk, laughing. Some stayed overnight, some stayed for days. But not every meal was a feast. Even on normal days, the rich ate better than most people saw in a lifetime. Their kitchens were huge, often in separate buildings. To reduce the risk of fire, dozens of workers, cooks, assistants, boys carrying water, women grinding grain. Huge ovens burned day and night. Pots boiled on open fires. Roasting spits turned slowly over glowing embers. The smell never left the air. Food was served in the hall or in private rooms. Breakfast was small, maybe bread, cheese, ale. Lunch was the main meal, heavy, served in the late morning. Dinner came in the evening, lighter but still rich. Meat was always present, even when it was rare elsewhere. The rich ate beef, mutton, veal, rabbit, pigeon, game birds, roast duck. They didn't eat to survive. They ate for pleasure. They also ate imported food: lemons from Spain, sugar from the East, spices carried across deserts, dried figs, dates, almonds, rice, oranges. Foods most people had never seen. Every bite showed their status. And it wasn't just what they ate, it was how they ate. They washed their hands before every meal. A servant brought warm water in a silver basin. You dipped your fingers, dried them on fine cloth. People were seated by rank. The most important sat closest to the Lord. Servants stood by to remove plates, bring new ones, keep the cups full. Table manners mattered. Don't speak with your mouth full. Don't reach across the table. Don't use your knife to pick your teeth. Use the bread to wipe your fingers. Use the right hand only. Left was considered dirty. And always show respect to the food, to the house, to the Lord. Banquets were more than meals. They were social currency. You invited people you wanted to impress. You made alliances. You made deals. You showed off your wealth. Even weddings and funerals were turned into feasts. People measured your power by how much you could feed them and how long you could keep it going. Some nobles went into debt to throw bigger feasts than their rivals. It didn't matter. The show was worth it. Even the church got involved. Monks and bishops often dined just as well, maybe better. They had land, they had money, they had kitchens the size of barns. On feast days, monks would eat in silence. But the food was rich. Fish cooked in wine, eggs with cheese, honey cakes, buttered turnips, almond pudding. Even when they fasted, they feasted. They just replaced meat with fish, or filled pastries with fruit. A fast in a monastery could be more luxurious than a normal day for a poor family. Meanwhile, the peasants ate barley bread, porridge, cabbage soup, maybe a bit of bacon if they were lucky. 1 meal a day, maybe 2. Nothing wasted, nothing left over. And they could smell the kitchens of the manor every time the wind blew, the smell of roasting meat, the scent of spice. It reminded them of where they stood. Food was power. It was the most direct kind. If you could feed people, they respected you. If you could feed them and entertain them, they feared you. The rich understood that, so they cooked big, they ate big, they celebrated every chance they had, not just to fill their bellies, but to show the world who they were. And no one ever forgot a noble's feast. Chapter 4. Fashion, Jewels, and Status. Dressing the part. If you were rich in the Middle Ages, people could tell before you even spoke. They saw it in the way you walked, the way you carried your cloak, the way your shoes pointed, the shine of the rings on your fingers. Clothes were not just clothes, they were armor, they were banners. They told the world what you were worth. The poor wore rough wool, uncolored, unshaped, unchanged from childhood to old age. The rich wore layers, bright colors, rare fabrics. They dressed to be seen, to be remembered. Let's start at the base. The richest men wore linen underclothes, clean, light, changed often. Over that, a tunic, usually wool, but not just any wool, fine wool, dyed deep blue, blood red, forest green, the kind of colors that cost gold. Some wore cotardies, a tight-fitting outer garment, buttons from the neck to the knees, covered in embroidery, edged with fur. The tighter the fit, the higher the status. Because only someone who didn't work could wear clothes that tight. Over that came cloaks, long, flowing, lined with fur, secured with a brooch of gold or silver, sometimes jeweled, sometimes engraved with the family crest. Shoes were leather, polished, sometimes dyed, sometimes carved. The toes came to sharp points. The longer the point, the higher the rank. Some were so long they had to be tied to the leg to keep from tripping. Belts were wide, covered in metalwork, hanging with small tools, or purses, or knives. Some belts were worth more than a farmer's land. Headwear mattered too. Nobles wore hats, caps, hoods lined with ermine or fox fur. During ceremonies, they wore circlets or simple gold bands. Hair was neat, styled, washed more than most. Nobles had combs made of bone or ivory. They used oils, herbs, rose water. Now the women. A noblewoman's clothing began with a shift, a simple undergown. Over that came the kirtle, a long dress, fitted at the top, wide at the bottom. Over that, the surcoat, sleeveless, with a deep neckline, sometimes so low it reached the hips. The sleeves were long, so long they touched the ground, edged with lace or silk, covered in small beads, sometimes pearls. Rich women wore girdles, decorative belts, gold chains, jeweled buckles, worn low on the hips. Their shoes were soft leather, sometimes velvet, lined with rabbit fur in winter. Their headdresses were works of art. Wimple and veil, horned hats, padded rolls, tall pointed hennins, some over 2 feet high, covered in gauze, pearls, gold thread, worn with pride. Their hair was often hidden, or braided, or coiled. Blonde was prized. Some women bleached their hair, others wore wigs. The goal was elegance, smoothness, wealth. Makeup was used carefully. Pale skin was considered noble. A tan meant you worked. So women powdered their faces, used lead paste, not safe, but popular. Cheeks were tinted pink, lips rubbed with red roots, eyes darkened with charcoal, eyebrows sometimes plucked into high arches. Jewelry finished the look, rings on every finger, gold, silver, gemstones, garnets, rubies, sapphires, emeralds. Diamonds were rare and mostly uncut, but still prized. Necklaces with crosses, with initials, with religious symbols. Some had lockets with tiny portraits or perfume. Brooches pinned to cloaks, armlets on the biceps, bracelets on the wrists, anklets hidden under long gowns. Even teeth were decorated. Some nobles had gold caps, not for health, for beauty. Men wore rings too, signet rings for sealing letters, family crests carved in stone or pressed into wax. Everything meant something. A ruby for passion, a sapphire for loyalty, a pearl for purity, a garnet for war. The richer you were, the more you wore. But not just anything. There were laws, sumptuary laws. Rules that told people what they could wear, based on class. A knight could wear silver, but not gold. A merchant could wear silk, but not fur. A peasant couldn't wear red, or purple, or anything that looked expensive. These laws kept the classes separate. You could not dress above your rank. If you did, you could be fined, or worse. But people broke the rules, especially the new rich. Merchants who made a fortune in wool wanted to look noble. They wore bright velvet, hired tailors, bought jewels. Old nobles hated it. But fashion moved forward. Tailors became important. They worked in cities, in castles. Some were hired full-time. Others traveled between estates. Their tools were sharp, their hands fast, their eye for detail unmatched. They made custom pieces for every size, every occasion. Weddings, feasts, ceremonies, funerals. Fashion changed over time. The early Middle Ages were simple. Long tunics, capes, belts. But by the High Middle Ages, it became dramatic. Tight sleeves, high collars, enormous hats. By the late Middle Ages, it was extreme. Men wore short doublets, padded shoulders, bright hose. Some looked like birds, others like statues. Women's gowns grew longer, sleeves widened, headpieces rose higher, hairlines pushed back. Everything became exaggerated. Rich children dressed like their parents. Small gowns, miniature hats, tiny shoes, gold bracelets, silk shirts. Their clothes showed their family's status. From the cradle, even servants had a uniform, liveries, coats in house colours, embroidered symbols, a way to show whose house they served. The more servants in matching clothes, the richer the household looked. Clothes were also seasonal, fur in winter, lighter fabrics in summer. The very rich had wardrobes for every type of weather, linen for heat, wool for wind, silk for show. Garments were stored in chests, made of oak, decorated with iron, lined with herbs to keep moths away. Clothes were folded with care. A maid might spend hours preparing an outfit. Laundry was rare. Washing too often could ruin fabric. Instead, clothes were brushed, aired out, perfumed. Perfume was another mark of wealth, made from flowers, herbs, oils, musk, stored in glass bottles, applied with cloth or fingers. Some nobles had their own scent made. Every item had a purpose. Every thread had meaning. When a noble entered a room, heads turned, not just because of who they were, but because of how they looked. They were color. They were movement. They were light and metal and scent. They were walking symbols of wealth, and they made sure everyone knew it. Chapter 5. Servants, Knights, and Private Armies. No one rich in the Middle Ages lived alone. Power needed people. Wealth needed muscle. Status needed service. Behind every noble was a small army. Some were armored. Some carried trays. All were essential. Let's start with the servants. Rich households were full of them. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, living in outbuildings, in upper rooms, in the basement, in the kitchens, in the halls. They started early, woke before sunrise. No time to waste. The lowest servant cleaned the floors, changed the rushes, emptied the chamber pots, scrubbed soot from stone walls, hauled buckets of water from the well. Above them were kitchen hands. They chopped onions, plucked chickens, stirred giant pots, cleaned knives, burned their fingers, burned their arms, got no thanks. There were scullery maids, washing dishes, scrubbing pans, polishing pewter until it gleamed, always on their feet, always soaked, always exhausted. Next came cooks. These had skills. They knew recipes, knew spices, controlled the flow of food, worked beside open flames for hours, could lose everything if they overcooked the swan. The butler controlled the drinks, wine, ale, mead. He stored it, guarded it, poured it, measured it, knew who drank too much, knew who drank fast. Nothing slipped past him. The steward was in charge of supplies, food, firewood, tools. He managed budgets, hired workers, ran the estate when the lord was away, trusted, feared, sometimes hated. There were stable boys, always in the cold, always covered in hair and sweat, groomed the horses, cleaned the stalls, fed oats and apples, saddled and bridled, slept near the animals. Grooms handled noble horses, war horses, hunting horses. They knew every hoof, every habit. A good groom was worth gold. Chambermaids served the lady, brushed her hair, helped her dress, cleaned her clothes, held her mirror, carried her letters, protected her secrets. There were nursemaids, wet nurses, watching the children, feeding them, rocking them, raising them while parents dined and plotted and travelled. Pages served the lord, young boys, noble born but low ranked. They learned by doing, carrying swords, holding dogs, running errands. One day, they'd be knights, but for now, they fetched slippers. Footmen were everywhere, standing behind chairs, holding torches, running ahead on journeys, delivering messages, opening doors. Every servant had a job, and they knew their place. They bowed, they waited. They never sat first, never spoke first, never looked the Lord in the eye unless asked. But even the servants served someone else. The knights. Knights were warriors, trained from childhood, sons of lords, sons of knights. Not always rich, but always respected. They started as pages, then squires. At around 21, if they proved themselves, they were knighted. A ceremony, a feast, a blow to the shoulder, a new life. Knights swore oaths, loyalty, honor, duty, to protect the weak, to serve the noble, to fight when called. Some lived up to it, some didn't. They wore armor, chainmail at first, later plate armor, shined until it gleamed, took minutes to put on, needed help to move. But it worked. They carried swords, long, heavy, balanced for killing. They also carried daggers, lances, axes, sometimes maces. Their horses were trained for battle, strong, fast, covered in armor too. Some knights named their horses, fed them better than servants. Knights were dangerous, but they were also fashionable. They wore bright colors, their family's crest, a lion, a star, a tree, painted on their shield, stitched into their cloak, placed on banners. In battle, they led the charge. In court, they told stories. In tournaments, they fought for glory, for money, for the attention of ladies. Some knights became famous, legends. Stories were written about them, songs sung about them. They became symbols of strength and courage. Some were landowners, others worked for lords. Some had their own squires, their own estates. A few lived better than barons. But knights were expensive, so the truly rich needed more. They had their own armies, private forces, loyal only to them. Soldiers paid in coin, or land, or favor. They guarded gates, patrolled roads, collected taxes, broke up riots, started wars. A wealthy noble might have 50 men. A duke might have 500. A king might have 5,000. Each man wore the noble's color, spoke his name with respect or fear. They were trained, practiced with spears, bows, swords, fought in drills, rode horses, built camps. Some were mercenaries, hired muscle, dangerous but effective. The rich used these armies carefully. They did not want war unless it paid. But when it was time, they were ready. A noble could call his men in a day, ride to a rival's border, show strength, claim land, demand respect. Some used their forces to intimidate peasants. Others used them to fight bandits, to protect trade routes, to escort family members, even to chase down stolen goods. And when kings went to war, nobles were expected to bring their men, their knights, their soldiers, their banners, their power. It was part of the deal, land in exchange for loyalty, and loyalty meant showing up with swords. The elite were never alone, never vulnerable. They were protected, surrounded, armored in people, servants to dress them, cooks to feed them, pages to run for them, knights to fight for them, soldiers to die for them. This was medieval wealth, not just money, but people. A living, breathing machine. And at the center, one person, the master of it all. Chapter 6. Travel, Horses, and the Roads of the Rich. Rich people in the Middle Ages did not stay in one place. They travelled, often, and they never travelled small. A peasant might live and die without leaving their village, but a noble could cross the kingdom in a month. A merchant could ride through 5 cities in a week. A bishop could travel with 100 people behind him. Travel was part of power, and it was an event. First came the horses, always horses. No rich person walked unless they wanted to be noticed. Horses were status. The bigger, the better, the faster, the rarer. The more well-groomed, the more expensive. War horses were thick and tall, strong enough to carry a knight in full armor. Hunting horses were lighter, built for speed. Riding horses were smooth and trained to obey without question. Each horse had its own servant. Grooms brushed their coats, cleaned their hooves, fed them oats, polished their saddles and reins. The best horses wore blankets stitched with gold. Some had silver bells braided into their manes. Saddles were carved leather, stirrup buckles shaped like lions, or birds, or family crests. The reins were dyed red, or green, with tassels at the ends. Women rode side saddle, draped in long flowing gowns. They sat tall, balanced, with poise. Their horses were chosen for calmness, smoothness, elegance. Children learned to ride early. Before they could write, they had ponies of their own, small saddles, soft reins, and servants to guide them. But it was not just about horses. It was about how you moved. Rich people didn't ride alone. They travelled in groups. Long processions. Servants in front, servants behind, guards on both sides. Horses carrying luggage, extra clothes, food, blankets, gold. Some brought tents, big ones, with embroidered sides, furnished with cushions, rugs, small altars, tables, chairs, travelling comfort, at all times. When a noble family travelled, people noticed. Dust clouds followed them. Villagers stopped to watch. Peasants bowed. Priests came out to bless them. If it was a lord on royal business, a trumpet was blown. If it was a merchant caravan, bells jingled from every pack horse. If it was a bishop, the cross was held high at the front of the group. They travelled for many reasons: to attend court, to visit family, to hunt, to trade, to inspect distant lands, to make deals, to escape enemies, to show off. Some went on pilgrimage to holy places, carrying small relics, donating money to shrines, asking for blessings. But even in worship, they travelled rich. They stayed in castles, manors, monasteries, rich townhouses, always hosted by people of equal rank, or by people trying to rise. Guests were fed well, given soft beds, musicians were brought in, fires lit early, extra servants hired just for the visit. Nobles never travelled without letters of introduction. scrolls sealed with wax, bearing crests, names, titles. So wherever they went, people knew who they were and how important they were. Sometimes they brought gifts, bolts of cloth, carved rings, small knives, rare spices, a way to thank their host, a way to outdo rivals. But travel wasn't easy, not even for the rich. The roads were bad, dirt and rock, mud in the rain, dust in the heat. Some were so narrow that carts tipped over, others so crooked that bandits waited around the bends. Bridges were rare, dangerous, made of wood, slippery when wet. River crossings had to be timed. If the water rose, you waited. If it rushed, you risked drowning. Rich travelers brought guides, men who knew the paths, the shortcuts, the safe inns, the dangerous woods. These men were paid well, and they were worth it. There were bandits, always, waiting in forests, hiding near bridges, listening for the sound of coins, watching for banners, rich clothes, fat horses. That's why nobles traveled with guards, swords on their hips, bows on their backs, watching every tree, every shadow. Sometimes a noble traveled with 20 men, sometimes with 100, depending on how rich, how important, and how much trouble they expected. If they were carrying gold, they rode in the middle, surrounded, protected. And if they were carrying letters for the king, they never stopped moving. Messengers were different. They rode fast, alone or in pairs, lean horses, light packs. They carried news, orders, secrets. Their job was speed and secrecy. They didn't feast. They didn't rest. They ran their horses into the ground. When they arrived, they handed over the letter, bowed, waited, and then rode off again. Same road, new mission. Merchants traveled with carts, packed with goods, wool, spices, cloth, wine, silver. They had drivers, guards, apprentices. They took longer, but they made money with every mile. Some even built private roads across their land to move faster, to avoid tolls, to avoid danger. That's how rich they were. They built roads just for themselves. And where there were roads, there were inns. Nobles didn't like inns. Too common, too crowded. But sometimes they had no choice. Weather, distance, no host nearby. Then they'd stop. But not just anywhere. They chose the best. The ones with clean beds, stables, a private room, a quiet hall. Their guards would check the rooms. Their servants would clean the sheets. Their cooks might take over the kitchen. Even at an inn, they brought their own comfort. On the road, fashion didn't stop. Rich travelers still wore silk, still wore rings. Their cloaks were lined with fox fur. Their boots were polished, their gloves embroidered, their hats tall and shaped. Some nobles even had traveling jewels, lighter, less valuable, but still impressive, so they could shine in the saddle. And when they entered a town, they made sure everyone knew. Banners flew ahead, trumpets played, children ran to watch, bells rang from churches. Important people came to greet them. It was a parade, every time. Sometimes they stayed for days, sometimes weeks. They visited markets, bought foreign cloth, sailed down rivers, held meetings, held court, inspected buildings, blessed churches. Then they packed up, saddled the horses, loaded the carts, mounted the guards, and moved on. The rich kept moving, always, because travel meant more than just getting somewhere. It meant being seen, being known, being feared, being remembered. It was not just about where you were going, it was about how you got there and how many watched you ride away. Chapter 7: Education, Books, and the Knowledge of the Elite. The poor learned how to survive. The rich learned how to rule. That was the difference. Education in the Middle Ages was rare, expensive, sacred, a luxury for the elite. If you were rich, you were taught to think differently. You learned not just how to speak, but how to speak well. Not just how to read, but what to read. You learned Latin, law, religion, and power. Poor children had work. Rich children had tutors. Boys started early, sometimes by age 7. They learned to read, Latin first, then French, sometimes Greek. They learned to write with quills, on parchment. Ink was handmade. Paper was rare. Mistakes were scraped away with knives. They studied the Bible every day, memorized verses, learned prayers, understood sin, heaven, hell. Then came philosophy, Aristotle, Plato, Boethius, big ideas, life, death, morality, logic, the soul. Then came law, canon law, church law, royal law, the rules of the world. Mathematics came later. Roman numerals first, then the abacus, then algebra, geometry, astronomy. Music was taught too, not to entertain, to understand harmony, the order of the universe. History was read from chronicles, stories of kings, wars, miracles, taught to make sense of the present, to guide the future. Sons of nobles were expected to know how to command, speak clearly, write letters, manage estates, interpret contracts, debate with clergy, discuss philosophy at dinner. That was education. Some boys went to cathedral schools, run by priests, strict, cold, focused. Others had private tutors, paid by the family. The best were monks or scholars, men who had traveled, studied in Paris, Bologna, Oxford. Girls were taught too. Not always, not equally, but noble daughters learned to read, to write, to manage a household. They studied scripture, memorized prayers, learned poetry, played music, wrote letters, read romances, chivalric tales, psalters, saints' lives. They were taught to sew, to spin, to manage servants, to track supplies, to plan feasts, to care for the sick, to raise children, to rule when their husband was gone. A smart noblewoman could run an entire estate. Some ruled kingdoms. Education was not just about school, it was about books. Books were treasure, handwritten, rare, heavy, made of vellum, bound in leather, covered in metal. A Bible could take a year to make, every page copied by hand, every letter perfect, every illustration painted with care, gold leaf, blue lapis, red ochre, green malachite. Books lived in chests, wrapped in cloth, chained to shelves, guarded, catalogued, named. Only the elite could own them. A single book could cost more than a horse. Most homes had at least one, a Bible, a book of hours, a psalter. The more books you owned, the more learned you were, the more powerful. Monasteries had libraries, rows of volumes, silent halls, scribes writing, illuminators painting, scholars reading. Some monks spent their entire lives copying books. Kings had entire rooms of books, stored in trunks, on shelves, on altars, some written just for them. Histories of their reign, genealogies, prayer books with their names. Merchants began to buy books too. Books on trade, navigation, medicine, business. They read them in Latin, or French, or translated into their local tongue. Universities were rising: Paris, Oxford, Bologna, Salamanca. Only the elite could attend. Tuition was high, books were rare, lectures were crowded, professors spoke in Latin, students wrote quickly, on wax tablets, on scraps. They studied theology, law, medicine, philosophy, science, sometimes all of it. They argued, debated, memorized, got degrees. Some stayed to teach, others went to serve kings. To be educated was to be feared, trusted, hired, respected. It was a key that opened doors, and some used it to write their own books. Nobles wrote poems, memoirs, letters, chronicles. Their handwriting became famous, their words copied by others. Some women wrote too, queens, nuns, wives of scholars. They wrote about love, about marriage, about politics, about prayer. Their words traveled farther than they did. The church guarded knowledge, decided what was holy, what was heresy. But the rich had access to everything. Secret books, old scrolls, translations from Arabic, from Greek, from Rome. They read about stars, about medicine, about magic. Some practiced alchemy, mixed powders, burned herbs, looked for gold, or life, or God. Knowledge was power, real power. It gave the rich something more than gold. It gave them ideas, and ideas could change everything. Chapter 8: Religion, Rituals, and the Church's Influence. The rich feared God, but they also bought favor from him. Religion was everywhere in medieval life. For the poor, it was survival. For the rich, it was politics. The church was more than a place to pray. It was a system, a structure, a rival power. And for many nobles, it was also a partner. Rich families funded churches, paid for altars, donated stained glass, paid to have saints painted on the walls, their family crests carved into the stone, their names written into the prayers. A noble's chapel was never simple. It was decorated with silk, gold candlesticks, books covered in jewels, carved wooden pews, private confessionals. They hired private priests, paid them well. These priests lived in the house, said mass every morning, heard confessions, gave blessings before dinner. Some lords built their own churches on their land, staffed them, funded them, controlled who preached, who was buried, who got married. Their sons sometimes joined the clergy, not for faith, for power. A bishop controlled land, taxes, troops. A cardinal had the ear of the Pope. Some rich boys became abbots before they could shave. Faith was tied to fear. Hell was real, eternal, filled with fire, screams, demons. The rich believed, and they feared judgment. So they donated, gave to monasteries, bought candles, paid for prayers, hoped it was enough. They paid to be buried near saints. They wrote wills full of donations, gave land to monks, gave gold to friars, paid for their own salvation. Some ordered 100 masses after their death. Some had entire psalters copied just for their soul. Funerals were grand, black velvet, dozens of candles, bells rang for hours, coffins made of oak, covered in carvings, carried by servants, followed by weeping women, professional mourners, paid to cry. Gravestones were carved with armor, with crosses, with coats of arms. Some were placed inside churches, under the altar. So every priest would step on their name during Mass. That was the goal, to be remembered, to be seen by God, forever. Religion also shaped daily life. The rich prayed in the morning, before meals, after meals, before bed. They confessed every week. They took communion. They followed fast days, but they fasted differently. No meat. They ate fish. No sugar. They used honey. No eggs. They got creative. Fasting didn't mean hunger. It meant changing the menu. They still ate well, still feasted, just with different rules. Holidays were religious: Christmas, Easter, saints' days. Every major moment was tied to God, to church, to ritual. They baptized their children with silver bowls, held them in cloth of gold, invited dozens of guests, gave out gifts. Weddings were held under vaulted ceilings, priests in fine robes, Latin chants echoing through stone. Some weddings were held to unite estates, combine families, secure alliances. The ceremony was sacred. The motive was business. Holy relics were collected, bits of bone, pieces of saints' clothing, splinters from the true cross. The rich paid to keep them, to display them, to show them off. Pilgrimages were made to Canterbury, Rome, Santiago, Jerusalem. The rich never walked. They rode, with guards, with servants. They brought gifts, gave gold, bought blessings. Some came back with crosses carved into their armor, proof that they had gone, that they had suffered, that they were holy. Monasteries welcomed rich guests, gave them special rooms, special food, private services. Monks kept their records, their confessions, their donations. Their names were written into books, read aloud once a year, prayed over. Religion gave the rich power, legitimacy, fear, but it also gave them something else: legacy, because in the end, they could not take gold with them, but they could buy memory, and that, for the rich, was almost the same thing. Chapter 9: Entertainment, Games, and Escaping Boredom. The rich did not work, not in the way peasants did. They had time, and they hated boredom. So they filled their days with noise, color, games, music, sport, spectacle. Entertainment was everywhere, and it was constant. Let's start with hunting. Hunting was not a hobby. It was a ritual, a symbol, a statement. The forests belonged to the elite. You needed permission to enter them, to touch them, to kill anything inside them. A noble would wake early, eat light, don furs, leather gloves, tall boots, bring the best horse, the finest bow. He was followed by dozens, pages, grooms, huntsmen, dogs, all barking, all moving fast. The forest echoed with horns, with calls, with the pounding of hooves. They hunted deer, boar, wolves, foxes. Hawks soared above, greyhounds raced below. Spears were thrown, arrows loosed, blood soaked the grass. Then came the triumph. The animal displayed, the horns blown again, the kill honored. The hunt was not just for meat, it was for skill, prestige, power. The women watched, sometimes joined, rode in embroidered gowns, carried light bows. Their horses were calmer, their dogs were smaller, but they hunted too. Falconry was another game of the rich, a sport of silence, a glove, a hooded bird, a flick of the wrist, and then the sky. Falcons struck mid-air, hawks dove into bushes. The elite trained them, named them, treated them like royalty. A good falcon was worth more than a farm. When the hunt ended, they feasted, told stories, exaggerated, laughed, and planned the next one. But not every day was for blood. There were games, chess, backgammon, dice, cards. The wealthy played for coin, for land, for fun. They played indoors, in silence, in candlelight, or loudly, with drinks, with crowds. Chess was the favorite, a game of kings, strategy, control. Nobles played it for hours, sometimes days. Moves were studied, patterns memorized. A well-timed win meant more than gold. Dice was faster, louder, riskier. Games of chance, of luck. Some gambled fortunes, some lost titles. Cards were newer, imported, painted by hand. Expensive. Each deck unique. Some gold-edged, some personalized. A gift between lords. Board games were carved in wood, in stone. Travel-size sets were carried in saddlebags, ready for boredom, ready for war camps, ready for long waits. There were also outdoor games, jousting, tournaments, competitions of power. Jousting was the main event. 2 knights, 2 lances, 2 horses charging at full speed. The rich loved it. Crowds watched. Nobles wagered. The lords sat in boxes. The ladies watched behind veils. The winner earned fame. Gold. Maybe the hand of a noble's daughter. Tournaments lasted days. They mimicked war, group fights, one-on-one duels, fake sieges, real bruises. Some men died. It didn't stop the games. Feasts followed, songs, dances, toasts to the victor. And then there was music. The rich hired minstrels, lute players, harpists, flute masters, singers, poets. They told stories of love, of war, of saints, of betrayal. Music played during meals, in gardens, during weddings, after hunts. It was the backdrop to wealth. Some nobles played instruments, practiced daily, composed pieces, played for guests, not for applause, but for status. They hosted troubadours, traveling performers. They came from far-off lands, brought news, gossip, foreign songs, new instruments. Their songs praised lords, mocked rivals, honored ladies. Their words carried weight. Theatre was rarer, but not unknown. Pageants were performed in town squares, sometimes inside castles. Nobles sponsored them, paid for costumes, for props, for stages. The stories were religious or romantic, dramas of saints, tragedies of kings, moral tales, performed by locals or by hired players. Masks were private, held in great halls, actors in masks, in robes, speaking in riddles, moving in dance, symbolic, strange, meant for the elite. Dancing was constant. Every feast ended in music and dancing. Men bowed, women curtsied, they joined hands, moved in lines, circles, pairs, formal, controlled. Every step mattered, every turn watched. Clothes flowed, jewelry sparkled, fans fluttered, eyes met, rumors were born. Even children had games, toy swords, wooden horses, balls, dolls, puppets. Some had carved animals, spinning tops, painted shields, gifted during holidays or after long trips. They played tag, ran races, hid in gardens, fought with sticks, laughed like their lives were easy, because they were. Not all entertainment was innocent. There were bear fights, dog fights, cock fights. The rich bet heavily, cheered loudly. Blood didn't bother them. Some owned performing animals, monkeys, birds, dancing bears, kept in cages, brought out for guests, dressed in clothes, taught to bow, to clap, to beg. And when nothing else worked, they travelled. To a cousin's estate, to a royal court, to a far-off monastery for a wedding, a baptism, a celebration, a treaty. They needed change. They needed eyes on them. Boredom was the enemy, so they hunted it with song, with steel, with laughter, with gold, because the rich did not sit still. They moved, they watched, they played, and they made sure the world watched them back. Chapter 10: Legacy, Lineage, and the Pursuit of Immortality. For the rich, death was not the end. It was the start of something else, something bigger. Legacy. Poor people died and disappeared. The rich made sure their names stayed. Legacy was everything. It was the reason for the castle, the land, the clothes, the servants, the power. All of it pointed forward, toward memory. It started with blood. Lineage mattered more than gold, more than love, more than law. It was everything. Your name, your family crest, your ancestors, your children. Nobles tracked their family trees like battle maps. They knew every great-grandfather, every cousin, every marriage, every alliance. They hung tapestries with the names of their ancestors, painted shields with symbols from ancient wars, named their sons after kings, after saints, after conquerors. Every child was a link, a living promise, a bridge to the future. That's why noble marriages were so strategic. You didn't marry for love. You married for land, for power, for connection. You married to grow your territory, to keep your name alive. Daughters were currency, Sons were insurance. A noble with 3 sons was safe. A noble with 1 was nervous. A noble with none was desperate. Heirs were raised with pressure. From the moment they could walk, they were watched, measured, trained, taught how to rule, how to speak, how to command. Daughters were trained too, to manage homes, to host guests, to raise future lords, and to marry well, very well. A good marriage could double a family's land, secure allies, turn rivals into brothers-in-law, prevent wars, start new ones. And once married, children followed. The more, the better. The more sons, the stronger the line. The more daughters, the more alliances. And each child needed to be remembered. Names carved into family trees, painted in chapel windows, sewn into altar cloths, written into prayer books. And when someone died, everything stopped. Funerals were massive, mourning lasted weeks, clothes turned black, bells rang, candles burned all day. But that was just the beginning, because death was not an ending. It was a moment to prove legacy. The tomb had to be perfect, carved in stone, shaped like the body, armor, gown, hands folded, eyes closed, a sword laid beside, a lion at the feet, an angel at the head. The name had to be clear, the date, the title, sometimes a poem, sometimes a prayer. Tombs were placed in churches, in chapels, in special family crypts, surrounded by ancestors, close to saints. Visitors would see, would stop, would remember. Some nobles built chapels just for their graves, hired priests to say mass forever, paid for candles to burn every day. A few built monuments, statues, arches, towers, anything that could not be ignored, anything that could outlast time. Because immortality was the goal, if not in body, then in stone, if not in flesh, then in name. Their lives were built for it. They funded churches to be remembered. They gave land to monasteries to be prayed for. They married well to pass on their name.
They commissioned books so their deeds would be written.
They fought wars so their descendants would rule.
Everything they did was for legacy, because to the rich, the worst death was being forgotten.
So they built memory, layer by layer, wall by wall, child by child. And in doing so, they became something more. Not just people. Legends. The rich of the medieval world lived differently. They dressed brighter, ate better, rode farther, built bigger, prayed louder, and died harder. But beneath the gold, the silk, the castles, they were still human. They loved. They feared. They dreamed of legacy. They tried to freeze time.
And in a way, they did.
Their names are carved in stone. Their faces painted on chapel walls. Their castles still rise on hills. Their choices still echo. We remember them not just for their power, but for the world they built to hold it. And now, that world is part of ours. Still standing, still shining, still rich.